Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Surprise, am Callie, not Ethan, here filling in today for community conversation. So I'm excited to be here. I always have so much fun when I fill in for these live streams. And actually, you guys are getting the freshest version of myself because I just got off of a week-long vacation. So I wouldn't call it a vacation. It was like a college athlete running camp where I ran lots of miles, sweat a lot, but it was a different kind of work. And so I feel like I'm plugged back into the work side of things with a fresh perspective. So, hello, Cash. No worries on not being able to chime in as much. Nathan and Jane, thanks so much for being here. I do have some general announcements that I'm going to start with before we open it up, but just always love hearing where you guys are from. So please be dropping that in the chat while I go over these announcements, as well as specific questions or things that you wanted to ask in today's conversation. So let's get started. This live stream is educational and not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline. If you're in crisis or you're even ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. You can also access online at www.9888, oh my goodness, 988lifeline.org. Go to your local emergency room or call 911. Lastly, we want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. At the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. A note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and it's being recorded. So without further ado, I just wanted to jump in. Hi, Wiley. Hi, Jane again. Oh, I see where you're from. Great. We have people from all over, which is so cool. But yeah, I was just in Mammoth Lakes, California, and I go every summer. And while I'm there, I'm training, but I'm also working with a lot of college athletes that are training and get to hear some really cool stories. And one of the things that I noticed this year that was really cool, because every year I go up and I tend to feel really anxious when I first get there. It's like a time for me to unplug from my work email. And I've noticed in past years, I didn't really allow myself to do that unplugging from technology and social media. And I've remained that same level of anxious. And this time, the first couple of days, it was like a little exposure where I did unplug and was nervous. And as I started getting in the routine of camp, it got a little bit easier. So imagine that, an exposure that you repeat over time starting to get easier. And I feel more refreshed than ever coming back. So if you guys have opportunities to do that, I know screen time can feel really addictive. Wiley is saying definitely having trouble disconnecting. That's one of my biggest struggles now too. But there's also something to say about one of my biggest struggles in the past used to be compulsions. And now to be able to talk about how I have a hard time unplugging from social media is a pretty cool win all around. So social media, work, all the things. But yeah, as you guys are all saying hello, I want to make sure that we are on topic with what you want to discuss. And so instead of me being all over the place, I could share stories all day long. But I'd love to just hear, maybe about something that you feel has resonated with you over the past week or two, maybe something that you feel you could use some advice on. I know one of the things that's come up with me a lot is sometimes people will seek requests about, okay, well, where do I go to get support for this loved one? Or how can I support a family member that's struggling? And I think that the best thing we can do, one, is take care of ourselves. And that's where I tie in this vacation piece, right? Like being able to unplug, but then looking to those evidence-based resources. And I often, when I don't know if someone from a different state is reaching out to me and I don't know of clinicians in that area, usually I do because the OCD world is pretty small. But going to that IOCDF provider resource page where you can type in based off the location has been such a great resource for so many. So let's see what Beth said. I can't even go on vacation. I'm sending my brother to give out proper care info for hermit crabs down the shore in Jersey, too petrified of getting COVID. I'm so sorry, Beth. I do hope that at some point in your life, anxiety doesn't have to make that decision for you, but it definitely means starting off small, right? So if right now taking that leap feels like way too difficult of an exposure, I always like to tell people there is still an exposure you can do that's taking you one step closer to that direction. So, one of my favorite things to tell patients is if they come in and they say, okay, well, we had this exposure set for homework and I just couldn't do it. Like if they're supposed to get their car cross-contaminated. Like maybe they're supposed to cross-contaminate some items in their car. And that was just too challenging because they haven't had anyone in their car before and they said, I couldn't do it. Maybe we could go outside and just cross-contaminate the door handle of the car, right? Like I always like to ask the question, what's one step that you can take this time that you weren't able to take before? What's one step you can take this time that you weren't able to take before? It doesn't have to mean that you have to conquer this big, huge exposure, but maybe if you can't go on vacation yet, that means cross-contaminating something in your home or just finding a place that you can tolerate a little more uncertainty in that space than you were doing before. And even if it's small, it's still a step in the right direction. Because I think when we stand still, that's when we start to feel a little bit more stuck and can lose motivation, right? If we don't see tangible progress being made, we can feel a lot more stuck in that. So yeah, I hope that helps to some extent. And I'm glad to hear that you're leaning in there a little bit. So here and there. Yeah. And that's another thing I would say too. It's so important to stay consistent with the exposures. Sometimes, I'll use this analogy of if you have a fear of flying and you only fly once a year, do you think that you're going to be able to overcome that fear of flying? Versus hopefully you have really good mileage points and you can fly every week for the next 2 months. You're way more likely to get back to your life quicker than if you were to only fly once a year. And that's something too. There's a lot of, if someone is really struggling and they're really severe with the struggle that they're dealing with, sometimes that word severe can be scary, right? Or if I'm saying, well, maybe a higher level of care, like partial hospitalization programming or residential could be helpful. I think we often get intimidated by that would mean I'm really severe. I shouldn't go to that, when a lot of people go to higher level of care because they need to get back to their life quicker. It doesn't always mean that this person is so severe. Yes, we do have individuals that are very severe coming into residential, but we also have moms that can't do the one time a week that really need to be condensed in their treatment for a shorter, compact period of time so they can get back to being a mom, right? Or a dad, or, just all of the different things that come into play. So if that's just something else I would consider. If OCD has taken so much of your life, maybe something a little bit more frequent for treatment could help. And I know resources are a whole nother conversation. We could spend a whole community conversation on. But I think that advocating for yourself and what you need, usually you can find some helpful loopholes. Malcolm, thank you for the question. So you said, can you please talk about disgust-based contamination OCD? I suffer from a severe form of this theme. What has been your experience helping people recover from this? Great question. Yeah, so I think we often hear OCD as this, well, you don't engage in this behavior because you fear something bad will happen. Disgust-based OCD, for those that aren't Malcolm, that want more education behind it, is you don't necessarily fear something bad is going to happen. You just feel disgusted. It doesn't feel right. You don't want to have to sit with that feeling, right? I might have disgust-based OCD and just hate the feeling of a sticky residue on my hands. And that would be really triggering to me and I can't handle it. And I would say, like, yeah, most of us don't like having something sticky on our hands, but for this individual struggling with disgust-based OCD, it's actually more debilitating than that, right? It causes a lot of anxiety that's unwanted. And so, Malcolm, there's the best approach is still engaging in the exposure with response prevention, depending on where you're at, right? If you feel like, well, I haven't had motivation to do exposures, or all of the exposures just feel like there isn't a level that's low enough for me to do, they all send me in a state of panic. One of two routes, right? So like if you're feeling like any type of exposure would make you feel panicked, it might be helpful to get some emotion regulation skills using something called dialectical behavior therapy first, to learn to regulate some of those emotions, and then you can incorporate the ERP. We see that a lot happen in higher level of care where someone really needs OCD treatment, they really need to do ERP, but they don't have any distress tolerance skills. And so usually in that case, it can really make sense for them to start doing some of that emotion regulation and then incorporate the ERP. The other thing I would say about that, though, is the general exposure work really helps with this, right? And so I like to say I prefer doing exposures with lower level exposures with no compulsions over higher level exposures with some compulsions. Some that engage in disgust-based exposure work actually tend to utilize some barriers and then slowly start to eliminate those barriers. And so there's a great individual that does a lot of disgust-based OCD that did a training at our clinic, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but he used the analogy of when you eat pizza, like maybe you really liked pizza, but then OCD got really intense and really bad, and you started to hate the feeling of grease on your hands. So maybe you start eating the pizza again instead of avoiding it altogether, but you start off using a fork. And then you continue to work through being able to eat pizza again and tolerating some of those feelings, and allowing it to get easier with time. So there's a couple of different approaches, and I think it really depends on the individual that's going through the treatment. But really, at the end of the day, it's still ERP, leaning into those fears, and don't get discouraged if you have to start off a little smaller, right? Like I think it's so hard when someone has a fear of touching doorknobs, and their family sees that for the first time in 3 or 4 months, they were able to touch a doorknob again. That family might say, okay, well, big deal. They're opening a door again. But what the family doesn't see is this individual maybe at first was just standing near the doorknob the first week. And then the second week, they were doing some visualizing of touching the doorknob and then cross-contaminating. And then maybe they would just touch their pinky to the doorknob and cross-contaminate. And then they got to the point where they could just open doors again and not engage in a hand wash. The family doesn't see all of those pieces that they participated in to get to that point. And that's where the education comes in, right? We've got to start somewhere. And so, like I said, for those listening, if you are just starting with some of this stuff, be proud of that. Like you're making progress, and it doesn't mean that it's got to be at this exasperated quickly rate. It needs to be in a timely fashion that makes sense so that you can get the long-term benefit. Bonnie said, I'm just starting ERP therapy with my therapist. I can manage some things, but the contamination just freezes and I avoid. Any advice? Yeah. So Bonnie, if you feel like you are not getting anywhere with those contamination exposures, is it that it's more of, okay, maybe I need to start with some lower level exposures? Or is it that the contamination is leading you to panic? And I'm wondering, like, are there some other subtypes that you might be struggling with? But long story short, if you are making progress in one area with your OCD, I still think that can really benefit the other subtypes that you're dealing with, because it sounds like the contamination just freezes. So I'm wondering, does that mean there's some other subtypes that you're actually able to make some progress with? Because if we truly are leaning into the core fears of exposure work, it shouldn't matter what subtype you're dealing with. You should make progress across the board. I've had a lot of patients get discouraged by the amount of things that trigger them. And they'll tell me, I think I'm going to be in treatment forever because I have 20 different triggers. When in reality, if all of these triggers lean back to the fear of being alone, or lead back to, I just wouldn't be able to cope, because that's a common core fear. Then if we're truly leaning into that core fear with some uncertainty of, it's okay that I don't know for sure if I can cope, but I can move forward with today and do the next thing that I would do if anxiety weren't a part of the picture, right? We build this tolerance of, wow, I didn't know the answer to that, and I was still able to move forward. Then it should be able to help across the board. So just make sure that in the ERP, you're leaning into some of that core fear work. And if your therapist hasn't brought up what core fears are, I would ask them to dive into that with you a little bit, because you really want to identify that before you're engaging in the exposures. And absolutely welcome, Malcolm. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, so I'm going to go through ERP treatment in the near future. Nathan, we love to hear that. Celebrations, snaps all the way around. Yeah, I would just say to that, don't put your life on hold. You deserve better than that, regardless of what your OCD is telling you. So I think that the sooner you can do that, nobody ever regrets doing the preventative work, right? Oftentimes we think I have to wait till it gets really bad, when in reality, my OCD started when I was 3, and I didn't get treatment until I was 21 when it got pretty severe, and it was a lot more painful because I waited that long. I didn't know it was OCD. I would have done it earlier if I got a diagnosis earlier, but you can save yourself a lot of, you know, difficult pain by starting sooner. So happy to hear you're getting started. Yeah, Beth, it sounds like we want to put that vacation on the future vision board and start cranking off some of those things that you can lean into right now, like you have been doing. You said you went out a few times, and just try to stay consistent with it. If we do it once a year, it's always going to feel as hard, versus if we start doing something more consistently, you'll start to see that benefit and you can build some more motivation around it. Taran, I hope I am saying that correctly. You said, I do suffer from sexual orientation OCD, and I do oftenly compare facial features between men and women. It is OCD different, TRAO, or so some OCD of something. For example, I compare jaw lines of different people. Yeah. So what I would say at the end of the day is that is rumination, right? Like when we get stuck viewing or analyzing something, of someone else to try to determine if we are attracted to that or not attracted, we only get stickier in our thoughts, right? And and when we try to evaluate something like that, we're already hyper aware of our body sensations, and so your body is going to notice so many more things or convince you that you're aroused by so many more things, and that just makes the OCD so much stickier. So I would treat that, the comparing of jawlines just like any other compulsion, and try to lean into the exposures, as you can, because the more we stare, even with body dysmorphia, right? Like when someone's struggling with body dysmorphic disorder, um, and they have the stare, like they continue to stare at themselves in a mirror, they're only building up more of their anxiety. Now, depends on the individual struggling. Sometimes if they've avoided mirrors altogether, being able to look in the mirror again would be the exposure. But usually when we're fixated on something, that means we're stuck and we want to work on moving forward without engaging in that checking behavior, like the checking of jaw lines as a compulsion. But thank you for sharing that. I think probably a lot of others listening to the live stream today resonate as well. Let's see. Beth said, I never had a fear of germs. I guess I still don't, since I'm only afraid of COVID. But now I have a newfound sense of what people go through with germs. Yeah. OCD can morph, right? So it can start with one subtype and then another one, and then you almost forget the old subtype when the new one comes on. And so thanks for your bravery with sharing that. But no matter how long a compulsion has been there, even if you've been struggling with that fear since it came about in 2020, it's still treatable and you don't have to suffer with it. I think at one point in my own OCD journey, I was latched onto a trigger for on and off for about 7 or 8 years. And it wasn't until I learned how to appropriately use ERP that I was able to kind of let go of that thought. Didn't mean that it didn't come up anymore, and it still does every once in a while, but it doesn't trigger me. Now it truly is just an intrusive thought without the compulsion following it. And I don't get that intense response to it when it comes up, right? Like everybody, research shows, has intrusive thoughts, whether they have OCD or not. The individual with OCD just has a heightened response to that intrusive thought until they do some of the work around it, and that can take some time. But you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all these things. Keep them coming. I love the interaction that we're doing. Otherwise, you have to listen to stories that I'm making up, and I don't, not making up, but that I'm coming up with. And I feel like it would be way more fun to get your questions answered. So let's see. Beth said I had OCD for decades. At most, it was annoying and time consuming, but it never kept me from doing anything. That's amazing, Beth. I think a lot of individuals do get kept from doing certain things, and maybe you were challenging it in a lot of ways you didn't realize. Like maybe you're doing some exposures without even knowing you were doing exposures. But I will say it doesn't have to keep people from doing anything. If it's gotten to that point for some of you, you're not alone in that. That happens to a lot of individuals. And I will say too, I think oftentimes people get discouraged about the idea of, well, my OCD's been around for this long, or I've been triggered by this thing for this long. And so that means it's going to take that long to get better. And that is not the case at all. You can be latched on doing all of these compulsions for years and years. And the average length of outpatient treatment tends to be 12 to 18 sessions, right? So, much less than years and years to get better when you really start leaning into the work. And if you're doing it in a more condensed fashion, right? If someone is struggling at a more severe manner and they need intensive treatment, then that response is going to be even quicker. So try not to keep to keep it in the mindset of, because it was this long of me suffering, it also takes that long to get treatment. That's not how it works. Or for treatment to work, it's much quicker when you truly are leaning in fully to the work. And I know it's hard. And that's another thing people say, well, that's so scary. I can't imagine doing exposure work. But the reminder here is, one, you start to build the education around it first, right? So we don't just, as a clinician in a residential treatment center, it would be horrible if a patient came in and said, my worst fear is this. And I just said, okay, we'll go do it. Right? They'd be like, this is not the treatment center for me. I'm in the wrong place. And they would leave and never come back. Luckily, that's not how good ERP works, right? So you build a treatment team plan with your provider. So I will never put an exposure on my patient's behavior plan that they aren't ready to do, or they aren't willing to put on their behavior plan. That would be a waste of both of our times. And so it's really collaborative, and you guys are working on the education together as a treatment team. And if that's not what's happening, then I would really make sure that you're plugging into a good exposure with response prevention provider, because that it should be a collaborative approach. And so, yeah, keeping in mind that once you have that education, once you build motivation, once you have, according to what Liz McIngvale would say, your greater good statement, right, or your why, that all builds motivation to do the exposure work. And it's not easy, but the only thing that's harder is living with untreated OCD, right? And you've already done that. So if you can live with untreated OCD, you can definitely do exposure work. And I think we forget that. Like, untreated OCD is the hardest thing to deal with. Exposure work, hard, but it gets you somewhere. It's not as hard as that. So that's probably my favorite thing to share for today. Please write it down and remind yourself multiple times throughout the week that you've already done the hardest thing. Okay, next piece. It is better than it was. Okay, great, Beth. I'm really happy to hear that you're moving through and OCD doesn't have you on as tight of a hold. I would just say keep pushing and keep making that progress because you should not slow down. You deserve to get your life back in. You can, and make sure you have that accountability set up in other areas. Sorry, I skipped one. Nathan, you were born with OCD. I hope that you are in control instead of your OCD being in control now. If not, keep working on it. You can get there. Let me just take a drink of my Zevia. Have you ever had this? It's so good. My favorite flavor is creamy root beer. Okay, so Bonnie said, how does one know if they are treatment resistant? Is it resistant from meds or ERP? Ooh, that's a really good question, Bonnie. I think that, I'm trying to say this in a non-controversial way. I think a lot of people assume that they're treatment resistant that aren't actually treatment resistant. So I think it's actually pretty uncommon to be treatment resistant. That doesn't mean that that doesn't exist, but way more people label themselves as treatment resistant than necessary. And we see that all the time, right? Because people that come to residential have already tried multiple treatments of ERP, and I will just say, or of OCD treatment. when they first come in, sometimes my mind even goes, well, what are we going to do differently? When in reality, they just haven't done good ERP, right? Because we see them plug in, they have the accountability. It was maybe the right level of care, whereas before maybe they were doing outpatient work and it was good ERP, but it wasn't enough. And we can see them make wonders with that. So, in regards to answering that question, it can be treatment resistant to meds, right? Certain people respond to certain medications better than others. Um, or ERP, but there's a ton of other pieces of information that we would need to really be able to make that call, right? Was it really good ERP? Is there another comorbid diagnosis that gets in the way that we need to address first, right? Is someone, like I said earlier, are they able to regulate their emotions, or is distress tolerant skills at zero, and maybe they need some dialectical behavior therapy first, right? So there's just so many components to answering that question, but um, 9 times out of 10, I would say it's not treatment resistant. It doesn't mean that you're broken and that treatment doesn't work for you. And I know that doesn't help when answering questions for OCD, because I'm not giving you a 100% certainty you're not treatment resistant. But I would say, like, almost every time, it's just we haven't done things in the right order yet, or it might not be the right level of care or the right quality of care for the OCD. So don't give up. There is an answer for you, and so many answers, right? Like, there's so many new research studies and trials coming out. But just before anything else, I would make sure that you get started with some good quality ERP. And if you've tried a therapist and that doesn't work, I hate when people start to feel like, well, that just means therapy's not for me. No, that can often just mean that wasn't the right fit for you. That doesn't mean that therapy's not for you. It took me um, 3 providers before I found the one that I felt helped me. If I would have just believed that thought the first time I went to a therapist for my OCD, I would have never gotten better, right? Because I would have just gone with that thought of, well, treatment's not for me, but I just didn't have the right fit. So don't give up on that. Keep pushing, and know that there's so many individuals able to talk through and help you plug into the right resource. So use those too. Use the advocacy page, the IOCDF. If you know of a good clinic that treats OCD, even like ours, sorry, I'm biased. I do work at OCD Institute of Texas, but it's okay to call that clinic and say, hey, do you have some outpatient OCD providers that you refer to or that you trust if you're looking for outpatient level of care and you know that that clinic does good work? Because they should always be willing to help give you some of those resources for your area. Okay, let's keep trucking. Uh, let's see. Spence said, I don't get a crown. What am I? The court jester. I think I missed an inside joke. Oh, Houston is having a pretty bad COVID surge. Okay, I see. Yeah, so Spence, maybe some contamination um, fears for you if you're engaging in avoidance, hunkering down, and stuff like that. Thanks for your vulnerability and for sharing. I don't know if I got the crown reference, but um, you can give me some clarity on that and I will laugh with you. So I feel like Ethan probably would have gotten it, but he's better at dad jokes than me. Shout out to Ethan. Yeah, so cleaning groceries in the early pandemic, not that much anymore. That was such a hard time, right? Because you were hearing so many different things from the CDC and didn't know what was accurate and inaccurate to do. So definitely exacerbated a lot of OCD symptoms for a lot of people. Um, Wait, Phyllis, what are you forgotten on? Did I skip your question too? Let's see. Um, yes, you're welcome, Erin. Thanks for the shout out. If I am skipping you guys, my apologies. This is not something I do weekly, or I don't know how bi-weekly, however often Ethan does this, but just put it in there again and I will get to it. Just keep pinging me. I like the pings. So I could never go to a treatment center. I'd have to, okay. Yeah, but that's hard. And I will say a lot of people can help support step ups to treatment. So if it's severe and you feel like you couldn't get into a treatment center, a lot of good clinics will also do the teletherapy work to get you there, or there are resources available like that. So try not to take no for an answer. There is a treatment approach that will work for you, and that doesn't mean you're treatment resistant. Phyllis is immunocompromised. I've come to accept that I'm going to catch some things. Yeah, that's hard, right? When there are some true risks that are involved, that can tie into OCD and make it even stickier. I think the best in those moments when you're already triggered by OCD, we can often lose insight, right, into, oh, I don't know what's my OCD and what isn't my OCD, right? We've all felt that at some point when we're really anxious. And uh, that's where it's helpful to have that third party looking in at the picture and saying, wait a minute, I think we need to take the risk that this might be OCD, or no, that actually makes sense. That might not, so just helping you alongside to navigate some of those triggers that are coming up. Been fighting OCD for all these years. Yeah. Yeah, keep fighting. And if you have been, some of you might have been fighting it for all these years with the same provider. So if I've been working with a patient for an extended period of time and they're not getting the results, then it's important that I refer them to the level of care that they need, or understand that maybe I wouldn't be the best fit for them. And so if you feel like you've been stagnant and been seeing the same provider for a year, that's probably a good indicator that you might want to consider some other providers. We have a podcast episode on the Anxiety Society called Good versus Bad Therapy. And I absolutely love it because it really breaks down what to look for in good, true quality therapy. Okay. One thing I did, this is from Beth, in 2023, was go to the parking lot of a grocery store and just stood there watching people go in and out. Then after a few times of doing that, I ran in and out. Yeah, that sounds like an amazing exposure. And what I would sometimes ask people too is, were you engaging in good response prevention, right? So you can knock, and this is not what I'm saying you did, Beth, but you can knock so many exposures out of the park. You can crush them and you can do some really hard things. But let's say you were engaging in self-reassurance the whole time, right? That might look like telling yourself, well, it's okay that I did this because my therapist said I could do it. Or it's okay that I did this because I know I washed my hands before, or I know I'm going to wash my hands right after. Or I know I would never really do that horrible, terrible thing. If we're engaging in these safety behaviors when we're doing an exposure, we're not actually getting the benefit of the exposure. So I would look for, have you done this exposure like a good handful of times and still feel like it's just as hard as it was when you did it the first time? If that's happening, it's likely that you might be engaging in a safety behavior of some sort. And your therapist should be able to help identify that. But often safety behaviors look like using a barrier, or engaging in self-reassurance, or getting reassurance from someone else, or cleaning, doing something to overcompensate for the anxiety that you were feeling, getting relief from that anxiety by switching out one compulsion for another. So just be on the lookout if that's something, if you're like, I've done this exposure so many times, Callie, and my anxiety is not getting any better. Well, then I would ask, we probably need to try to identify a safety behavior that's going on. So keep that in mind. I love that you guys are chatting with each other. NoCD provided therapy in Canada. Great. Do they provide good ERP in Canada? I know that just with any provider, if you're seeking treatment in Canada or in Houston or in any area, you can quiz your therapist. So that's just what I would say, regardless of who you're asking about. Is when you ask the therapist, or when you tell the therapist what you're struggling with, some of the things I would look for: do they give you a diagnosis in the first few sessions? Like, are you telling them you have OCD? Or were they able to say, yeah, this meets diagnostic criteria for OCD, or you have major depressive disorder, or whatever it is, right? Are they giving you a diagnosis, and have they been clear about that? Because that's really important for a good therapist to do. And then I would ask them, what treatment modalities do you do? I wouldn't say, hey, do you do ERP? I would let them tell you that they do ERP, or that they do ERP and ACT, or that they do good cognitive behavioral work with ERP, just have them answer that question for you. And so I would say interview your therapist and make sure they're checking the right boxes for that, and listen to that episode that I was sharing a little while ago, because it'll go deeper into some of those reasons. Um, let's see. Bonnie, don't lose your confidence. You can do this work. I know it feels terrifying at times, and overwhelming. And I would just say, look for the small wins more than anything, right? So um, often we get stuck in this, well, I have to be able to go on this trip a year from now, and I can't even picture myself leaving the front door. Okay, well, it wouldn't make sense for us to just focus on that trip. What are you doing today to lean in? What's one thing you did today that was different from yesterday? Even if that's delaying a hand wash for 20 seconds, right? Or even if that's not delaying reassurance seeking, that's still one step further than what you did yesterday. And I would track some of those wins, because otherwise it can feel defeating when we're taking small steps. It can feel like we're stagnant when we're actually not. So um, please don't lose confidence in that. It's just about getting those puzzle pieces right. Um, let's see, keep chatting with each other here. Let's see. Do you see the crowns next to username and YouTube? Oh, that makes so much more sense now. No, I do not see the crowns. I don't get to see that from my end. I only see your emoji for your picture. So thank you for clarifying that for me, but I missed out on the crowns. I'm sure others see it though. They're joining from YouTube. Um, I'm just learning about TMS and deep brain stimulation by surgery. What are your thoughts, and do they work? Yeah, great questions. There is research for both. I know with TMS, I think it would still be more supplementary to the exposure with response prevention treatment that you're doing. And TMS for depression is actually uh, really good. I think it helps a lot. I'm not a psychiatrist, and they could speak more to this than I could, but deep brain stimulation, there's also a lot of positive research on that too. But that is when you've exhausted all of the other approaches. So have you done good quality ERP? Have you taken a good SSRI, SNRI, or medication that's prescribed for OCD? And have you done those things intensively at an intensive level, at like a residential level of care? If you haven't, those would probably be a good requirement to try first, because although they're good outcomes for deep brain stimulation, it's, I think, usually important to do the first line standard care for OCD treatment. But that's a great question, and I would. I know you had talked about kind of the fear of the losing hope, and if you are feeling like you've exhausted the other resources, but I don't remember who had said that they weren't able to get to residential treatment. Like I said, and I know the treatment journey can be pretty exhausting, and you might have to try multiple providers, but seriously, there are some incredible providers that could do virtual work, or that could come to your home. And maybe they start with you on, like, people are out there that can help meet your needs. And if you are worried about, well, how could I handle that if I can't leave my house? How could I have someone in my house? All of those things. I would just say there is some type of compromise that they probably could meet you at. And remember, living with untreated OCD is always harder than doing the exposure work. The untreated OCD, you've done the hardest of the hard. And so this next line, although hard, remember, it's not as hard as that, and it gets you somewhere. So please try to keep that in mind. And thank you for your vulnerability with that. We have about 5 more minutes. Ashley, thanks for joining us. We're so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that you're seeing a therapist that's really helping you make some traction. That's huge. Oh, the crown is a leaderboard thing, but I can't click on the crown if I don't see the crown. So I hope you guys are clicking away on those crowns, because I want you all on the leaderboard. That's really cool. I feel like I'm being cheesy, but this is fun for me. It's kind of like weird because you're talking to yourself a little bit, but you're also talking to you guys in the chat. So fun times. We've been here together for a long time. We lift each other up all the time. Oh, Beth, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing that with me about you and Bonnie. I am so happy to hear that. And it means the world that you guys come together. That's what community conversations are for, right? So that's huge. You want to try TMS for depression and TMS for OCD too. Awesome, Nathan. Yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there, and even the IOCDF page should be able to help you kind of find or weed out providers in that area. But they're all over, so I'm glad that you're looking into it. Ash said I used to touch wood 5 times a day to prevent bad things from happening. I love that you said used to. I think that means that you probably don't do that anymore. So way to work towards that freedom. And let's see here. Yeah, so if you guys want, I love that you're chatting about some of these things. We've got about 5 more minutes. So if you have a question or two more that you want to drop in, I'd love to get to those. Lewis, I definitely think either making sure you have the right therapist or mainly the right goal before having treatment, as if not willing to leave the house, the uncertainty treatment isn't going to work. Yeah. Yeah. Those are some great points. And I think, yeah, we're just remembering everybody is on. Good question, Phyllis. So Ethan is feeling a little bit under the weather, and I stepped in last minute today to join, and it was I could only do it if we did it 45 minutes because I have another obligation. So normally this is an hour. This is not going to be an ongoing thing. It was just for the last minute fill in. We still wanted to give you guys something instead of canceling. So thank you for your understanding with that. Let's see. Solely alone won't cure OCD, but okay, I see that was a continuation. You guys are hoots. Let's see. So if I were to have some closing advice or closing statements with all of this, first, I think I would say that, yeah, welcome, Rachel. Thank you for joining more than anything. First, I would say that, yes, treatment is hard. And I think that we do want to keep in mind that when we do exposure work, we know it's not a walk in the park. When we do treatment for OCD, it's not easy, and nobody expects it to be easy. But two, that it is a collaborative approach, right? So if any of you aren't in ERP because you're afraid of what your therapist is going to make you do, that is a stigmatized belief about ERP. It is collaborative, and it's something that you work on with your provider together. And not something that they just tell you to engage in. You can get to this place of freedom, moving through that treatment with someone helping you. Like, you wouldn't believe how much more accountability in ERP helps than you trying to do ERP alone. Even as a provider that treats OCD every day, if my OCD started to rear up again, I would most definitely need to see my own therapist, because my accountability for myself alone is not the same as someone keeping me accountable. And Phyllis, I would say, first, I'm jumping ahead. Beth, I love the silliness. Please bring it. And Phyllis, there are so many options for quality ERP at different rates. So group therapy, there are ERP groups at a lower rate. There's sliding scale. I don't know the insurance situation, but all that to say, there's so many different avenues, and you do have to advocate for them. And I know it's a pain because we should just be able to go to someone and see them. But please advocate, because you can find coverage for low cost treatment. At one point, we were doing a sliding scale ERP group at like $5 a group. And I think those still exist out there. So please don't give up. Find that work, because you deserve it. And starting out with ERP, yes, great point, Beth. It's something that you build your way up with. So it's not like you jump in head first to the hardest exposure you would ever do. I always tell patients you would never come back if I made you do that. So it is really, you start off small. And we might talk about that biggest exposure, but my favorite way to talk about it is when someone says, Callie, I would never do that. And I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. And then when we're revisiting it later in life, because they've master all these other exposures and they go do it, and it's a little triggering, but it's not that big, for me to be able to say, whoa, remember when you said you would never do that? Like, that is the best feeling as a therapist to be able to have. So when patients tell me they never do that, I do tuck it away for later to bring back up when I know that they've broken that barrier, because it is the coolest thing ever. So with that being said, I do have a joke since we are being silly tonight, and I have it and I wrote it down. So let me just grab it real quick to close us off. And it is my favorite joke right now. And I've told it a few times. I'm curious to see how it'll work, just because usually I need someone talking back to me, but I've been really good at talking to myself tonight. So let's see. What's the difference between a tuna, piano, and glue? Feel free to answer that in the chat if you guys would like. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds. And it's silent. This is an exposure for me right now, just waiting for everybody to be like, what is this girl talking about? The answer is, you can tune a piano, but you can't piano a tuna. Wait, I know you guys all have a question. You're asking me now, well, what about the glue? Everyone gets stuck on that. Da-da-da. That was it. I hope you liked it. Lewis, thank you so much for joining. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. Beth questioning, I understand. It was a different twist for tonight. Every once in a while, we got to keep you guys on your toes, you know? But yeah, I seriously love joining in. You guys are all just a blessing to me too. Yeah, take the plunge, like the ice bucket challenge. We'll leave on Spence's word for tonight. And I do have a quick announcement that I just remembered I need to go over. So closing announcements. Thanks, Jack MHA, for your support. Learn more about Jack at jackmha.org. And then the IOCDF is a donor-supported nonprofit organization. So please consider making a donation at iocdf.org/donate. Have a wonderful night, everyone.